Sachs Kiddushin Daf Ayin Gimel. We begin with the last two lines on Daf Ayin Vez. The Gemara discusses what is the halacha of the ger. Who is the ger allowed to marry? Specifically, is he allowed to marry a mamzeres or not? That is dependent on the sugi, where the Torah says that a mamzer or a mamzeres cannot come bekahal Hashem in the nation of Hashem. Is the ger included in the nation of Hashem or not? So the Gemara begins with a brayso that introduces a machlekes Tanaim, Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yossi says a ger is allowed to marry a mamzeres. The ger is not considered to be kal Hashem. Rabbi Yehuda says the ger cannot marry a mamzeres. Not only that, but he is even allowed to marry a kohenes. The halachos that a kohen can't marry a gieres does not apply in the reverse. A kohenes could marry a ger. Now the Gemara discusses the specific machlekes about a mamzeres marrying the ger. The Gemara explains the sources of each of the two Tanaims. First of all, Rabbi Yossi, how does he know that a ger is allowed to marry a mamzeres? So Rabbi Yossi points out that the word kahol in the Isurei Nisuin because of Yuchsin, forbidden marriages because of their ancestry, it says the word kahol there 5 times. It didn't have to say all 5, and therefore we get 5 drashas out of it. So the first 3 are for Kahanim, Levim, and Yisraelim, that a mamzer is not allowed to marry not Kahanim, not Levim, and not Yisraelim, all 3 of those. And the next 2 times it says kahol is talking about who a shtuki is allowed to marry. Again, as shtuki is someone who doesn't know who his father is, therefore he's a suffix mamzer. So he's allowed to marry both a mamzer and a Yisrael, both a regular mamzer, even though he's only a suffix and he might be a kosher. Still, he's allowed to marry a mamzer, and he's also allowed to marry a Yisrael, even though he might be a mamzer. Now, those are 2 more kahols. That it teaches us the halacha that a suffix mamzer goes l'kula either way. Okay, now what is Rabbi Yehuda's opinion? So the Gemara brings 3 explanations to what Rabbi Yehuda holds. The Gemara first says that he has an extra kahol. That is to say that the mamzer is not allowed to marry kahol to include the gerim. He's not allowed to marry them either. Why is there an extra kahol? So the Gemara's first pshat is that Kohanim and Levim are together, the one shaven. You don't need a separate kahol for those 2. If you can't marry one of them, you can't marry the other. You don't need the Torah to tell you that separately. Second pshat is no, those are separate. However, to say that a shtuki is a suffix mamzer is allowed to marry a mamzeres or a Yisraelis, you don't need 2 separate psukim for that. And the reason is because when the Torah says L'yovi mamzer b'kal Hashem, it's talking about a vadai mamzer to marry a vadai Yisrael, a vadai non-mamzer. That's where the Isser is. If there's a suffix in either way, then if it's the suffix marrying the mamzer or the suffix marrying the Yisrael, either way that is not included, and therefore that's mutter. Those are the first 2 pshatim in Rabbi Yehuda. The Gemara's second pshat in Rabbi Yehuda is that he has a different pasuk, is a different source. It says hakol chuka achas lechem v'lager hagar. So hakol is put together with hager to teach you that the ger is part of kahol. And once you know that, then the mamzer is not allowed to marry the ger because it's part of kahol. What does it basically do with that? He says no. The phrase chuka achas divides the 2. We're not applying hager to hakol, and those aren't the same. The Gemara now focuses on the second halacha. We said that a ger and also an even meshuchar or a chol, all of them are usher to marry a kohen, that is a female of any of these, is usher to marry a kohen. However, they are mutter to marry a kohenes. A male ger, even meshuchar or chol is allowed to marry a kohenes. The Gemara says it supports the position of Rav, the name of Yehuda, or Rav as quoted by Rav Yehuda, who says that the isser of psule marriages for kahuna only applies to the male kahanim. It does not apply to the female kahanim, therefore it's all allowed. The Gemara brings an interesting incident on the topic of the marriages of a ger. The Gemara says that Rabbi Zera said a drasha, and he said that a ger is allowed to marry a mamzeres, implying that a ger is not called kahal Hashem. There were a number of gerim there. They weren't happy, and they all threw their esrogim at him, and then everybody started throwing their esrogim at him. Said Rava, no one should say such a drasha in a place where a lot of gerim are found. Now, when Rava himself said a drasha in the same town, which was Mechuzah, so he first started off by saying a ger is allowed to marry a kohenes, and they were all happy about that, so they lifted him up on sheets of silk cloth. But then he said that a ger is mutter to marry a mamzeres, and then they were upset, and they said, no, you just ruined what you said before, because that implies that a ger is not called kal Hashem. So he said, listen, I did good for you both ways. I said you can marry whoever you want. You can marry a mamzeres, you can marry a kohenes. You're good either way. Says the Gemara halacha l'maisa, a ger is allowed to marry a kohenes, because like we said, a kohenes does not have the halachas of psule kahuna, And a ger is also mutter to marry a mamzeres, like we hold like Rabbi Yossi. Okay, the Gemara now refers back to the Mishnah, starts in Sugya, discussing what is the halacha of a shtuki and an asufi. So first of all, shtuki. Shtuki is someone who knows who his mother is and does not know who his father is. So the Mishnah had said that a shtuki is allowed to marry a kosher if he doesn't know who his father is. Obviously, he's a suffix mamzer. It could be that his mother had a znus with a man who creates mamzerus with her. So Rava says that min ha'torah, you could assume that he is kosher, and that's why he's allowed to marry a kosher. What's the reason? So let's make a cheshbon of roiv. The majority of people, the majority of men walking around would not create a mamzerus with his mother, because an akom or an eved does not make him a mamzer. Now, who else? We know that his mother is not married, otherwise we would know who his father is. Therefore, the only potential fathers who could create mamzerus would be if it was a karov or a mamzer. Those are a minority of the population. Now, if the man approached the woman when they had the bia, then the halacha is that kol de parsh miruba parsh, we assume that he came out of the majority, and therefore we assume he was not someone who would create mamzerus. If, however, she went to him, so we have the rule that the mixture, which is the men here, they're in one place and someone's approaching them, it's always viewed as being 50-50. So, however, 50-50 is a suffix. So on that, the Torah says, you have a mamzer, bekahal Hashem, it's only a vade mamzer and only a vade kahal. If you have a suffix involved, then it's mutter. And that's why a shtuki is mutter. Now, the question is, why is it asr midrabanan? Why did the Rabbanan make a zera asering a shtuki to marry a kosher? So here, the Gemara has some discussion. The Gemara first wants to say, because we're concerned that he might be marrying his own sister from his father. We don't know who his father is, and therefore maybe the woman he's marrying is actually the daughter of his father. So the Gemara says, if that would be true, then you should also make a rule that a shtuki can't marry a shtukis, because you don't know who their father is, and maybe the father gave birth to each of them. Someone says, no, you can't assume that every znus that happens from the same guy. Why should we assume that if his father was Mazana, then he was Mazana a second time, and therefore gave birth to the girl that he wants to marry? We know the halacha is that a shtuki is allowed to marry a shtukis. So the Gemara says, another question we could ask is, what about, can a shtuki marry the daughter of a shtukis? Shouldn't be able to do that either, because even though we know who this shtukis's husband is that gave birth to the daughter, because we're only talking about the daughter of the shtukis, but maybe that husband is his father, and therefore the woman he wants to marry is again his sister. However, we know that that's not the halacha. He is allowed to marry a shtukis, and he's allowed to marry the daughter of a shtukis. Therefore, you got to say that we're not concerned for any of these things because they're all loishchiach. The Chachamim don't make a gzeira on thing which is loishchiach. A shtuki is altogether loishchiach, and the reason that they made a gzeira midrabanan that he shouldn't marry is because just ma'ila asu b'yochsin is a general rule. We always demand a higher level of exactness when it comes to ancestry. Okay, now Rava speaks about an asufi. An asufi is found in the street, completely abandoned. He doesn't know who his mother or his father is. So Rava says, again, midaraisa, he's kosher. Why? So we don't know who his mother is, and it could be that she was an Ashes ish, and it could be that she was a Penuya. Now, if she was a Penuya, so like we said before, he should be kosher. There's no reason to assume that he is a mamzer, as we said earlier. Here, the problem, though, is that she may have been an Ashes ish. So for that, Rava says, if she would be an Ashes ish, why would she abandon him? An Ashes ish could always say that the child is from her husband. The only situation which you need to be concerned is if either she was an arusa, and therefore couldn't be from her husband, or her husband had traveled away and couldn't be from him either. Now, however, the possibilities that he's a kosher is that either his mother was a penuya, which is likely, or even if she was an Ashes ish, perhaps he was a kosher born from her husband and they abandoned him because they couldn't afford to feed him. Now, since there's two situations for either side of the coin, it's therefore 50-50 suffix, and again we go back to only a vadai mamzer is aser in a vadai kal Hashem, not a suffix mamzer or a suffix kal Hashem, and therefore he's mutter. Now, why is there exer d'Rabbanan? So again, the Gemara says maybe he's marrying his sister. Again, he doesn't know who his father or his mother is, and the person that he's marrying might be his own sister from his father or even from his mother. We don't know which side. So the Gemara says, no, why would we assume that? Why would we assume that everyone's abandoning everybody? We're referring to an asufi marrying an asufis, which is the only one that they're allowed to. So you can assume the couple that abandoned him, they had another child and abandoned that one. You can't blame every abandoned child on the same couple out there. Now, And of course, you have the same Taina as before. You can't say that it was a Maises Nus because you can't blame every Nus on the same guy. So the other question you could say is that he shouldn't be able to marry the daughter in a Sufi either because he also, like we said before, may be that her new husband is his father. So therefore, the Gemara has to say that it's because it's L'shchiach that we do not have any of these Xeras. However, Ma'il Asa B'Yuchsin, and therefore we require a higher level. Gemara now lists a number of circumstances in which we would apply the halacha of a Sufi, meaning to assume that he is a puzzle, or where we would not apply the halacha of a Sufi, and therefore we would assume he's a kosher. The rule here is if the circumstances in which we find him indicate that the mother loved him, but was forced to abandon him, then we assume he's a kosher. If the circumstances indicate that she was trying to get rid of him and she didn't care about him, then we would assume that he's a puzzle. So a few situations are, first of all, if he had a bris milah, you could assume he's a kosher. She wouldn't be concerned to give him a bris milah if she was just trying to get rid of him or even to kill him. Now, if he was found to be his limbs to be healthy and white and energetic, then again we assume that he's a kosher because obviously he wasn't born from znus, because it is the constant tashmish towards the end of the pregnancy that causes that circumstance, and she must have been married for that to occur, and happily married, not involved in znus. Now, if he was found to be well anointed with oil, or if he had makeup around his eyes, then again, it's all a raya that she loved him. If he had a kemeya, a written parchment around his neck, or he had certain strings that are a skula, or even if he had a packet of spices or herbs that are health related, they're all indicating care, and therefore there is no concern that he's a puzzle. Now, if he was found placed in a tree, so if it was in a place where an animal could reach him, then he's in a Sufi because that's abandoned to his fate. If, however, he was in a high enough place he could not be reached by an animal, then she's not trying to get rid of him. She took care of him to that extent. He was found in a shul. So shuls in the days of Chazal were outside the city proper, but they were often mazikim there. And it would have to be a shul which was close enough to the city and there were enough people around that there wouldn't be mazikim. Then you could assume that again he's taken care of. Otherwise, you assume he's abandoned. Now, if it's found in a place in a type of tree called zardasa, so it was often attracting shadim. Depends if it's close to the city or not. In a similar situation. Next, the Gemara brings a meimar that says if he was found in a pit where they throw the date pits, so that's often outside the city, and again there are mazikim there, so he's not taken care of. However, if you found him in a river, that is, she put him in a basket and set him afloat in the river, so if it's in a place where the ships are common, then they would find him. She went to that extent to take care of him and make sure he would be found, then he's a kosher. If, however, it was found on the side of the river, where it's filled only with snow melt and there are no ships, that shows a lack of care, and therefore he's a puzzle, like in Asufi. Now, if he's found in Rishos Harabim, so if it's found in the center of the Rishos Harabim, then he is a puzzle. It's not taken care of. It's found at Tzidei Rishos Harabim, then he's a kosher. So now the Gemara quotes the statement of Rava, and the Gemara is going to try to figure out what he's referring to. So Rava said, in famine years, then he's a kosher. There's no din Asufi. Someone says, what's he referring to? If he's referring to Rishos Harabim, where we said he assumed to be puzzle, so why would we assume just because it's famine years then his parents are going to kill him even though he's a kosher and throw him in Rishos Harabim? That wouldn't make sense. So maybe you'll tell me he's referring to Tzidei Rishos Harabim. Tzidei Rishos Harabim, he's considered to be kosher even if it's not famine year. So what are we referring to? So therefore the Gemara says it's referring to something completely different which we haven't quoted yet, and that's Halacha said by Rav Yehuda in the name of Rabbi Abba, name of Rabbi Yehuda bar Zavdi in the name of Rav. There they said that what if they found an Hasufi and then two people show up, a mother and a father, and they claim, hey, that's our kid. So is he trusted? Are they trusted or not? Do we believe them? So the Gemara says that if he's still in the market, that they found him in the street and he's still in the street, then they are believed. They can come and say, yeah, he's our kid. However, if they come afterwards, after he was already established to be an asufi, he's already established to be abandoned, and they show up and say, he's our kid, then we don't believe him, because now he's already known as being abandoned, and they decided that they wanted to claim him as their own, and therefore they're not believed. On that, Rava says, if it's hunger years, we do believe them, and that's because in hunger years there's a lot of asufis around. We want to try to minimize it, so we relax the rules. Now, on that subject, Reb Chizda said that there are three types of situations where someone's believed only right away, but after a while, their trustworthiness expires. So one is about an asufi that we just discussed. Another one is a midwife. What's the midwife? So if the midwife wants to testify about twins, which one is the older one, and therefore which one is the Bechar, so she's only believed while she's there, and she didn't leave. Once she left, she comes back, and we assume she lost track. She doesn't know which one's which, and we don't trust her. Rabbi Eliezer says even if that it has to be that she stood there for her to be trusted. What's the difference between those two things? Where it says the difference is if she turned away. If she turned away, would we assume that she lost track and not to trust her anymore? So if you say that she has to be standing there, that means and not turn away. But if you say that she left, that's the problem. So as long as she was there, then we're good. Now, the last thing is someone who patters their friend. That's referring to a Mishnah in Maseches Nida. It talks about three women sleeping in a very narrow bed, and they're all cramped together, and then they find blood in the bed. So we don't know which one it's from. Could have been from any of the three. But if one of them does a bedika and checks to make sure that she's not seeing blood, she's not seeing her period, then she is assumed to be okay. However, if she checks and she finds that she's tameh, then we assume the blood's from her and the other ones are tahar. But that's only if she checks right away. If she checks after a while, then she's not assumed that the blood's from her. Could be from the other ones anyway. And right away means that she reaches for the bedika cloth and she doesn't have to go find it or get it. It's right there and she could use it right away. Now, on a similar note, the Gemara quotes another brisa. This one says that the midwife is trusted to say which child belongs to which woman, assuming that there are multiple women who gave birth in the same room or building, same hospital, and it's some confusion as to whose child is whose. So you trust the midwife, even if it's a question of which one's a kain, which one's a levi, which one is an asin, which one is a mamzer. Now, the midwife is only trusted if there's no error, there's no suspicions. But if there are suspicions, then you don't trust the midwife anymore. Says the Gemara, what do you mean by error? What kind of suspicions? If it's one person who's claiming that there's a problem here, so why should that be a suspicion? Rav Yochanan said that a single individual doesn't make suspicions. So it must be either that there are multiple people saying it, there are two or more, or maybe here an error is a problem because here there's no chazaka what the situation was before. When Rav Yochanan said one person doesn't create suspicion, is only referring to where we were moksik, we had certain assumptions and he's changing from them. Here we don't know which baby belongs to which mother. We have the testimony of the midwife, we have another person saying the opposite. So there, the one person saying the opposite is enough to create a lack of clarity here. Now, on a similar vein, the Gemara also says what happens when somebody sells a property or he sells an object, and it's not clear who he sold it to. Two people claim that he sold it to me. Now, so the halacha is that the person who sold it is trusted to say who he sold it to as long as he still has the object and he has to give it to the right person. Otherwise, he's responsible to return the money that he took, and he gets a misha para for agreeing to sell and not giving it to the right person. So it's still his responsibility to finish the deal, and therefore he's trusted because he knows who is the one. If, however, he already gave the property over, then he forgets, and therefore he's not trusted to say whose it was. So says the Gemara, why don't we see who he took the money from, and Lefizeh will know who's the one who bought the thing. So says the Gemara, we're referring to we took money from both of them, one in order to buy this and one against his will for something else, and just didn't remember who he took the money for what.